Within the walls of the Royal Victoria Hospital at McGill University in Montreal, Jerzy Choróbski took his first steps into the prestigious world of brain surgery. In 1930, at age 28, he was hired by Wilder Penfield, a future prominent figure in neurosurgery. Choróbski later recalled, "I received a scholarship to McGill University in Montreal. There, I began working under the supervision of the renowned neurosurgeon, Professor Wilder Penfield, who first became my mentor and later my close friend." Historians at the Montreal Neurological Institute attest to this formative relationship. Penfield's relationship with Choróbski was unique and ran through the course of their lives and the life of the institute. Penfield mentored Choróbski for nearly 50 years, shaping his path in neurosurgery. During his training in Canada, Choróbski did experimental work and participated in neurosurgical procedures. This work, under Penfield's supervision, served as the basis for Choróbski's Master of Science degree. Subsequently, Choróbski and Penfield became the first to demonstrate that cerebral vessels are innervated by parasympathetic vasomotor nerves, similar to those in peripheral vessels, which control the dilation of cerebral blood vessels. After the publication, news of their findings reached Harvey Cushing, who praised Choróbski in a letter to Penfield. "I have just been reading with a great thrill your paper with Choróbski, to whom my compliments, in the last number of the archives. It's simply a magnificent piece of work. You can well understand how stirred I am by your demonstration of a special parasympathetic bundle coming off from the brainstem, in view of my long-arm lucubrations about a cerebral parasympathetic system, reprinted in a book article I am sending you." In 1932, Choróbski joined his mentor, Penfield, at a meeting of the Society of Neurological Surgeons, a gathering of leading American neurosurgeons from Harvey Cushing's circle in Boston. Penfield brought his 30-year-old scholar to the forefront of the field, with Cushing and Penfield recognized as co-founders of neurosurgery. Choróbski, seated among the luminaries, was introduced to Cushing, connecting him to the core lineage of modern neurosurgery giants. This pivotal encounter bolstered Choróbski's confidence, which he would later pass on to future generations of Polish neurosurgeons. In July 1933, Choróbski became a resident at the Department of Surgery and Neurosurgery at Northwestern University in Chicago. He worked for a year under Loyal Davis, a disciple of Harvey Cushing. Passavant Hospital was nicknamed the Crystal Palace for its chandeliers and Tudor-style interiors. The operating room in which Choróbski operated with Davis had a gallery above for students to observe surgeries. Choróbski cared for patients and assisted Davis at neurosurgical procedures. Professor Mazerovsky quotes Choróbski, "My dear colleague, please don't complain. When I worked in America, I had patients speaking 5 languages on 6 floors." At that time, Passavant didn't have a dedicated neurosurgical ward on a single floor, so neurosurgeons had their beds scattered on different floors, in rooms with patients from other surgical specialties. In addition, Chicago was a major destination for immigrants worldwide, particularly the large Polish community that had traditionally settled there. After completing his residencies in the US and Canada, Choróbski received a Rockefeller Foundation Vanderveer Fellowship, which provided a final year of training before settling in Warsaw in 1934. While visiting 15 leading neurosurgical centers, Choróbski studied under leading neurosurgeons, including Percival Bailey at the University of Chicago. There, Bailey taught him the microscopic pathology of brain tumors, laying the foundation for the origins of Polish neuropathology and for the establishment of Choróbski's own laboratory, later led by George Wisłowski. At the time, there were 3 main neurosurgery centers on the East Coast: Boston at Harvard, Baltimore at Johns Hopkins, and Philadelphia at the University of Pennsylvania. Choróbski completed training in all 3. He met Gilbert Horax in Boston, Cushing's right-hand man, and then visited Charles Fraser in Philadelphia, who created the subtemporal approach for trigeminal neuralgia. He also visited William Mixter, who published a landmark article that year on intervertebral disc herniation and preoperative diagnosis of radiculopathy. At Yale, Choróbski met John Fulton, a neurologist who studied at Oxford and Harvard, a friend of Cushing and Cushing's biographer. Finally, Choróbski visited Walter Dandy at Johns Hopkins, a pioneer in ventriculography. During his visit to Johns Hopkins University, Choróbski was the victim of a theft, losing over $2,000. In the surgical dressing room, he left behind cash in his pants pocket. At that time, there was no guard, no camera monitoring, and no lockers. Choróbski kept cash on him everywhere. Despite reporting this incident to the Rockefeller Foundation, he was not compensated. This event highlighted the personal and economic challenges he faced during his journey. As the United States endured difficult times following the 1929 stock market crash and the subsequent Great Depression, Choróbski's visit to Johns Hopkins University completed his North American training. He continued his Wanderjahr en route to Europe. He visited the Oxford Neurosurgical Center, led by Hugh Cairns, who trained under Harvey Cushing. Choróbski then visited Gordon Holmes at Queen Square Hospital in London. In Amsterdam, he went to the Neurology Institute, led by Bernard Brouwer and his student Olgenik, the first neurosurgeon in the Netherlands, who also trained with Cushing. Choróbski's visit to Clovis Vinsong in Paris in 1934 was no coincidence. They met 7 years earlier while watching Thierry de Martel's neurosurgical procedures. Choróbski valued his first contact with Vinsong on a 1927 visit to Joseph Babinski's neurology department in Paris. Thanks to Vinsong, I was hooked on neurosurgery, as he led us, his assistants, to operations by Thierry de Martel. In fact, Choróbski's fascination with brain surgery began with Babinski and Vinsong. The last prestigious meeting during his European Wanderjahr was with Ottfried Forster, a renowned German neurologist and self-taught neurosurgeon from Breslau, currently Wrocław. Choróbski spoke fluent German, but both polyglot men also knew Polish, Russian, and French. Forster pioneered epilepsy surgery and cerebral cortex mapping. He performed surgery under local anesthesia while stimulating the cortex in conscious patients. Many of the World War I veterans suffered post-traumatic epileptic seizures from scarring and had embedded skull fragments, not infrequently infected. Pharmacological epilepsy treatment was not yet known. When asked why he became a neurosurgeon without any surgical training, Forster replied that he would make the diagnosis, advise the surgeon where to operate, and then the patients all died. In consequence, he declared, "I decided I could do no worse." Indeed, Forster's surgical and scientific outcomes were significantly better. He clarified the function of nerve roots and mapped the cerebral cortex. Despite being despised in Germany, he was admired worldwide. His research and scientific discoveries attracted the world's best. After completing 5 years of neurosurgical residency in the United States, Canada, and Europe, Choróbski and his wife Victoria returned to Poland permanently in August 1934. Penfield assessed his future. "I am very much pleased with Choróbski and feel that he has a future in Warsaw that may well prove to be a brilliant one." In direct communication, Penfield offered a word of warning to Choróbski. "I expect your success, but don't think you'll have it all at once." They were prophetic. One would think he would be met with enthusiasm upon returning to Poland after 5 years of intense study, research, and surgical training at world-class centers in Europe, the United States, and Canada. Yet, this is how Choróbski remembers it. Nothing of the sort. The absolute misery began for me. Everyone seemed to understand the need to popularize the new specialty, which had already taken off so effectively elsewhere. Still, whenever I started discussing the need to allocate beds at one of the hospitals, it proved impossible to do so. I faced stumbling blocks of difficulties. Despite the enthusiasm of figures such as Professor Orzechowski and Stefan Stasinski, the mayor of Warsaw, and the favorable public opinion, the situation was actually hopeless. Suddenly I learned that the talented military surgeon, Colonel Sokolowski, who had previously worked in Torun, intended to establish a trauma surgery institute in Warsaw. When I learned of the possibility of locating our center at the institute, General Rupert immediately agreed to establish a neurosurgical facility in the red brick building of the Garrison Hospital on Nowowiejska Street, opposite the University of Technology. In 1935, General Rupert, head of the Department of Health at the Ministry of Military Affairs in Marshal Pilsudski's government, officially approved the establishment of a neurosurgery department at the newly established Military Institute of Trauma Surgery in Warsaw. The first patient was admitted on November 6, 1935, and Choróbski considers this date the beginning of the first neurosurgical ward in Poland. 2 months after the opening, Adam Kunicki was hired. He already had some experience in neurosurgery, having completed 6 months of training abroad with Clovis Vinsung and Thierry de Martel in France. Kunicki formally began working with Choróbski as a volunteer delegated by the Social Insurance Institution in Lodz, from which he received his salary. Shortly after, in January 1937, a second assistant surgeon, Ernest Ferenc, began working at the clinic. Like Kunicki, he had trained as a volunteer and received a grant from the National Culture Fund. The financial compensation of medical and nursing staff in the interwar period was inadequate. When Choróbski applied for an assistant professorship in 1936, he concluded that no one could survive on the monthly salary of 240 zlotys. This was especially true given the department's substantial workload, which prevented him from maintaining an extensive private practice. He was forced to work both privately and academically to meet his daily expenses. Adam Kunicki, in turn, applied to the Mianowski Memorial Fund Committee in 1938 for an extra allowance of 100 to 150 zloty, as he had been married for a year and was struggling to support his family on his current salary of around 300 zloty. The Ernest Ferenc scholarship was even less, at 200 zloty per month. Therefore, the enthusiasm and scientific achievements of Choróbski's team are commendable, given the medical staff's difficult financial situation. Their scientific work developed at a highly rapid pace. Choróbski published papers in both Polish and English language literature. His works on the treatment of subdural hematomas and acute craniocerebral trauma would become a Bible for a generation of his residents, a foundation for their preparation for specialty exams, and a handbook for trauma management during the upcoming World War II. The result of intense scientific work from 1934 to 1938, and a culminating moment in the history of Polish medicine, was the official establishment of neurosurgery as a specialty. A letter dated January 11, 1938, addressed to the rector of the University of Warsaw, formally announced this historic news, stating, "Given the current state and development of medical knowledge, the existence of neurosurgery as a separate specialty is essential. The Ministry of Public Education strives to provide this field of medicine with the greatest possible support." From that moment on, the importance of neurosurgery as a specialty became unquestionable in Polish medicine. Unfortunately, the head of the Institute of Trauma Surgery, Colonel Dr. Sokołowski, who was hostile to neurosurgery's independence, interfered with patient care, hindered patient admissions, limited the number of neurosurgical beds, and imposed restrictions that Choróbski could not accept. Due to the escalating conflict, efforts were made to find a new location for the neurosurgery department. Thanks to Professor Orzechowski's persistence and determination, an agreement was reached with Professor Radlinsky, head of the surgical clinic at the Infant Jesus Hospital. This brought the neurosurgery department into the university clinic complex and, at the same time, onto the same campus as Professor Orzechowski's neurological clinic, to which Choróbski's department was then subordinated. After more than 8 months of renovation, the neurosurgery ward was opened in March 1939 with 20 beds. Hence, the new location and structure were described as the first independent university-based neurosurgical unit in Poland. Despite the cramped conditions, the work setting was significantly better than at the Institute of Trauma Surgery, as the department had its own operating room and staff, something the previous location lacked. In recognition of his active research and neurosurgical travels during 5 years of international training, Choróbski met many renowned figures in neurosurgery. He was therefore invited to conferences abroad, where his name became increasingly recognized. In 1937, he was invited by the Berlin Medical Society to attend a lecture by the Irish neurosurgeon McConnell at the Hotel Bristol in Berlin. There would be nothing special about this invitation, except that it was sent to Choróbski at a time when Germany was under Adolf Hitler's Nazi rule. In 1937, leading guests from the neurosurgical world gathered in Berlin and Breslau for an extraordinary symposium of the Society of British Neurosurgeons, attended by 39 leading European neurosurgeons. After one of the afternoon sessions, the guests dispersed to hotel bars and restaurants to relax and unwind. Among them were the Irish neurosurgeon Dixon Wright and Jerzy Choróbski, who were all in attendance. When they returned to the Hotel Bristol in Berlin late that evening, somewhat tipsy and merry, they were surprised to see a long row of German military jackboots displayed along the corridor outside the hotel room entrances. The pranksters then hit upon the idea of mixing up and rearranging all the shoes to play a trick on their owners. One could only imagine the morning bustle and frustration of the German soldiers, who in panic had to swap shoes to fit their owners. However, the Germans may have taken offense and considered the incident sabotage, which could have led to severe punishment by the Nazis for the pranksters. Through their behavior, Choróbski and Wright, war veterans, expressed their disapproval and contempt for the ideology of war. They dared to raise their hand and play a prank on the very people who, a few years later, would attack their home countries. With their daring act, anticipating the clash of nations 2 years from then, they outpaced the times with their mischievous calculation. On September 1, 1939, Nazi Germany declared war and brutally invaded Polish territory. Just 2 weeks after the German invasion, on September 17th, the Soviet army launched a surprise attack and occupied territories in eastern Poland. From then on, Poland struggled with 2 invaders. Caught between the Germans from the west and the Russians from the east, Poland was divided between the neighboring powers, and Warsaw was besieged. A 6-year ordeal for the country's civilian population and the barbaric acts of 2 ruthless occupiers began. The outbreak of World War II found Choróbski and his medical team stationed in the neurosurgery department of the Infant Jesus Hospital, which had opened just 6 months earlier. In wartime conditions, in addition to their daily work with patients, Choróbski and his team's duties also included clandestine work, treating wounded underground soldiers and providing medical assistance to those in hiding, which was forbidden under penalty of death. Choróbski quickly adapted to the new situation. He had already had a brush with the country's military operations and warfare. While studying medicine, he participated in the Silesian Uprising. During his high school years, he witnessed battle clashes during the Polish-Ukrainian War near Choróbski, where constant fighting pitted soldiers against the then aspiring grand strategist Stanislaw Maciek. In the wake of the Battle of Warsaw in 1920, Choróbski enlisted in the army at the age of 18 and resisted the Bolsheviks as a bombardier in the 6th Heavy Artillery Regiment. Furthermore, the tradition of fighting for the Polish national interest is closely linked to Jerzy Choróbski's brother, who, as a medical student in Vienna, volunteered for the Polish legions and perished during World War I. For his heroism, Stanislaw Choróbski was posthumously awarded the Virtuti Militari Cross and the Independence Fighters Cross. During the Siege of Warsaw in September 1939, Choróbski was assigned to the Warsaw Evacuation Hospital, headed by Commander Edward Loth, located in the University of Warsaw building. During the September German invasion of Poland, Choróbski made several trips to operate on the wounded near the front lines at the hospital in Otwocka, which was under direct Air Force fire and relentless bombing. For his actions in the first days of the war, he received the Silver Cross of the Virtuti Militari. Choróbski describes his role during the September German invasion of 1939, and his restraint, modesty, and unpretentiousness are evident. I don't like to revisit that period, as it is associated with traumatic experiences. I received this Virtuti Militari cross for my participation in the September German invasion. I served as a physician in a field hospital operated by Colonel Professor Edward Loth at the University of Warsaw. I was also sent to a frontline hospital in Otwocka, where, I remember, we performed surgeries for 17 hours straight under the direct air bombing. The military authorities recognized that my work during the Siege of Warsaw required a certain degree of civic courage and sacrifice. But could I have acted differently when so many people were dying around me? My care of injured civilians and soldiers was my contribution to the fight for the freedom of my homeland. Choróbski repeatedly performed surgeries on patients in the ghetto's Jewish hospital, which carried the risk of very severe penalties, including execution and deportation to a concentration camp. He did have permission from German authorities to move around the city and enter the Jewish ghetto with his surgical equipment, but the permissions weren't always respected. Choróbski confirmed, "I went to the ghetto several times to perform surgery. Once, the rabble guards at the ghetto entrance even tried to take away my surgical instruments. I was saved by a Wehrmacht captain who was an assistant professor of psychiatry. He visited our hospital and expressed interest in our work. Whenever I went to the ghetto, I took him with me. A decent man. They sent him to the Eastern Front specifically to die, and he died." The uniform and rank of a German officer certainly safeguarded Choróbski's risky venture into the ghetto. His fluent German proved immensely useful, not only in establishing closer contact with a German officer, but also in any life-threatening situation resulting from a confrontation with a ghetto guard. One of Choróbski's operations in the ghetto was witnessed by the future professor of neurosurgery, Jerzy Shapiro. Shapiro was in the ghetto while simultaneously continuing his medical education at clandestine courses. One day, Choróbski arrived at the ghetto hospital to operate on a patient who was paraplegic due to a spinal tumor. This is how Shapiro, later a student and friend of Choróbski, met his master. Shapiro continued in his memoirs, "A man of about 35 was admitted to the neurology ward with a diagnosis of a spinal cord tumor. Due to the lack of a suitable specialist on site, Dr. Choróbski, head of the neurosurgery department at the Infant Jesus Hospital, was asked to render a consultation and perform surgery. Although providing any assistance to Jews at the time was life-threatening, for example, Professor Rashia died under such circumstances, Dr. Choróbski arrived. I saw a young, slender man, bursting with energy, who had performed an equally brilliant operation to remove the tumor. When 3 days later, the patient was back on his feet and walking, the medical student's incredible admiration was unsurprising. It was then that I told myself that if fate allowed me to survive the horrors I had witnessed and the war, and if I completed my medical school, I would absolutely dedicate myself to neurosurgery. And so, it happened." Shapiro, mindful of his resolution, after receiving his medical degree in March 1947, reported to work the following day in the office of then Associate Professor Choróbski at the Praski Hospital in Warsaw. During the World War II German occupation of Poland, Choróbski experienced a rather unusual event in his life. A rather unusual circumstance occurred to me during the war. I had official permission to operate on the Germans, and I actually did so. This was extraordinary because a Polish surgeon was not allowed to touch a German. There was a strict ban on Polish physicians treating German soldiers, but at the time, there were few specialists in brain surgery, both in Poland and worldwide. Given the shortage of neurosurgical personnel, the German authorities were apparently forced to grant Choróbski official permission, presumably with the consent of Wilhelm Tonus himself, the first German neurosurgeon and chief neurosurgeon of the Luftwaffe Air Force on the Eastern Front, who had known Choróbski personally since before the war. Furthermore, Tonus realized that Choróbski's Austrian-German accent would not arouse suspicion among elite German officers, who were unaware of their enemy operators' Polish origins when preparing for surgery, gathering medical history, or engaging in verbal interactions. By virtue of his professional rank and function, Tonus courted his generals, who might have suffered serious head injuries that would require immediate surgery without the possibility of transport to Berlin. He counted on Choróbski, the only trained neurosurgeon on the Eastern Front, yet on the enemy side. In the autumn of 1941, General Choróbski, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces in Poland, decided to organize a staff news bulletin distributed to a very narrow circle of interested parties, containing translations, speeches, and synthesized studies by the most distinguished specialists from Great Britain, the United States, and neutral countries in the fields of military, political, diplomatic, economic, and social affairs. Jan Karski explains, they presented a non-Polish perspective on the European situation. They were decidedly less dismissive of Germany in tone and more rational than the productions of our underground press. Overall, they provided the leaders of the underground resistance with the opportunity to reflect, primarily on the significance of the Polish cause in the war against Germany. To collaborate with Jan Karski, General Choróbski chose Choróbski, a polyglot and trusted comrade in arms. Karski further recalls, when the concept of a staff bulletin emerged, General Choróbski personally approached him, Choróbski, for assistance in monitoring the situation, as a man of not only the highest competence, but also the moral integrity to guarantee the publication's objectivity. Choróbski was also exceptionally intelligent, resourceful, and highly organized. From 1941 to 1942, Choróbski and Karski, 12 years his junior, worked together in an apartment on Czerwonego Krzyża Street. Choróbski transcribed selected radio broadcasts from foreign stations, primarily the British BBC, French Radio Londres, and occasionally American CBS and NBC. The German authorities strictly forbade possession of a radio by Polish citizens under penalty of execution or deportation to a concentration camp. Karski explains his collaboration with Choróbski. I generally received Choróbski's manuscripts of his transcriptions, which I then edited, polishing them a bit, also aesthetically. After Karski had edited them, a messenger would take them to headquarters while they were away. The owner of the apartment on Czerwonego Krzyża Street, Lucina Bielecka, now elderly, spent most of her time at home. A message could be left at almost any time. The message was simple. A movie ticket was booked for a specific time. A response was expected within 25 minutes. This was, of course, a screening at the Czerwonego Krzyża. Completed translations, with initial stylistic proofreading, were sent to Alexander Gistor, who set the final editorial tone. However, Gistor usually made no significant additions. Following a series of searches for radios in the area, it was decided that the Philips radio required modification. At the end of December 1941, Choróbski announced that the radio was to replace another type of equipment. When Karski saw an electric stove on Choróbski's kitchen table one day, he wasn't particularly surprised. However, when he plugged in his headphones, his interest grew dramatically. It turned out that a BBC speaker was speaking from the stove, and he could hear it just as clearly as from the Philips. Karski was impressed. A radio, converted into an electric stove, was hidden in a dugout under the floor in Choróbski's office. A tall chest of drawers completely concealed the hole beneath the floor. Karski didn't know where Choróbski hid the radio equipment. He never asked about the device's location. Security reasons dictated this. Choróbski usually brought the listening device to the kitchen, where the two of them would conduct surveillance. To make matters safer, he kept his underground presence far from the apartment's front door. Choróbski led a double life. By day, he operated on patients and served as head of neurosurgery, and in the evenings and at night, he was a conspirator at the listening post. Because he possessed a radio, every day posed the threat of search. He lived in a constant state of anxiety, if not fear. It was a gamble for survival. The intensity of the work, combined with continuous stress and irregular sleep, affected Choróbski's later health. Karski explains the motivation behind Choróbski's decision to take on the dual role of surgeon and conspirator's translator, which, it seems, was beyond the capacity of any single individual, simply because he knew languages. Secondly, he was interested in politics. Perhaps most important, however, was his inner passion to participate in changing reality. He did this thousands of times during surgical procedures, intervening in pathologically altered brain structures. I think what he was doing was a different kind of surgery. He was trying to mold, or perhaps change, the minds of the underground's most important decision-makers. It appears he succeeded in this task, as his choice of translations influenced the thinking of his underground military and civilian commanders. On August 1, 1944, tragedy struck the city of Warsaw with the outbreak of the Warsaw Uprising, German crimes against the capital's inhabitants, mass executions, and the barbaric devastation of the city by the Nazi invaders and occupiers. The last entry in Choróbski's neurosurgical department archive book was made on July 31, 1944. The following day, the so-called W hour, Choróbski reported for duty as a surgeon at the insurgent hospital at the Terminus Hotel, 26 Chmielna Street in Warsaw. A week later, on August 8th, the Infant Jesus Hospital received an urgent evacuation order upon learning that Heinrich Himmler, in accordance with directives received from Adolf Hitler, had issued an order to exterminate the Polish nation. Every inhabitant was to be killed. No prisoners were to be taken. Warsaw was to be razed to the ground, thus setting a terrifying example for all of Europe. The order also included the murder of women and children. The entire city was to be razed to the ground, down to the ruins of houses, streets, utilities, and everything within. Himmler added that the intelligentsia of this 16 million-strong Polish nation would be liquidated. This nation, which has separated us from the East for 700 years and has constantly hindered us since the First Battle of Grunwald. Thus, from a historical perspective, the problem of Poland will cease to be a problem for our children, for all those who come after us, and even for us. During the evacuation of the Infant Jesus Hospital, the German authorities banned the removal of hospital equipment. Saving the archives, surgical instruments, library, pathological specimens, and other scientific materials was punishable by death. In Choróbski's absence, the evacuation route from the hospital through Pruszko and Twarki to Piasto was covered by nurses Lodinska and Dukelska, as well as by Swiniarski, who guarded the neurosurgical equipment throughout the journey. Risking their lives, they hid all the surgical instruments, including the department's archives, probably in carry-on luggage, and transported them to Pruszko, then to Twarki, and then to Piasto on a horse carriage. Thanks to their audacity, Choróbski's neurosurgery had the necessary equipment to function soon after the end of hostilities. Faced with the overwhelming military might of the German occupiers, The uprising collapsed on October 2, 1944. Over 500,000 residents were forcibly expelled from their homes and sent to transit camps near Warsaw, from where thousands were illegally deported to concentration camps, including Ravensbrück, Auschwitz, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen, Stutthof, and Mauthausen. From the outset of the uprising, several 100,000 Warsaw residents were reduced to beggars, deprived of their homes, property, jobs, and the dignity of life. At the end of the Warsaw Uprising, Choróbski made his way to the Infant Jesus Hospital and, together with the hospital's administrator, Dr. Okolski, evacuated the last of the wounded and sick. Until the final day of the evacuation, October 7th, they ensured that the remaining hospital equipment was transported to centers near Warsaw. Together with Director Okolski, Choróbski oversaw the transport of as much medical equipment as possible to Warsaw hospitals to prevent German looting. The German command was responsible for ensuring the security of private and public property. Still, it turned out that they deliberately plundered and removed national assets, exploiting hundreds of Polish prisoners of war. The Germans engaged in criminal acts of vandalism throughout the hospital, taking away the most expensive X-ray machines, which the hospital staff were unable to salvage due to their size. The Nazis burned down the building of Warsaw's Collegium Anatomicum, anatomy building, the collections of the unique library and museum of the Department of Descriptive Anatomy of Professor Edward Loth, who perished in the Warsaw Uprising under the rubble of the building 3 weeks before the devastation, unaware of the cataclysmic fate of his life's collection. Kazimierz Mocharski, head of the Home Army Radio Telegraph Service, recalls the moment he met Choróbski. While unloading food, I speak with the hospital administrator, Dr. Okolski, who suggests we should take one of the patients to Pruszków. We're reluctant to take such a companion, as he wasn't injured. But after finding out who it was, I was delighted. I saw Ludwik. During the Warsaw Uprising, Choróbski conducted radio surveillance for the daily Home Army Insurgent News and ran the foreign section. The last issue, featuring Choróbski's column from the World Fronts, appeared in the final issue, proving that Choróbski fought until the very last day of the Polish uprising. Choróbski continued his mission to fight for a free Poland, working double shifts as a surgeon and translator, and again spending his nights saving wounded insurgents from death, while the rest of his time was devoted to listening to foreign radio stations and relaying information about the global political situation. From Warsaw, Choróbski, riding in a Ford truck with a Red Cross flag, reached his designated quarters in a private home in Pruszków. He found himself surrounded by high-ranking figures from the uprising's political circles. Wincenty Kwieciński, head of counterintelligence and the information department of the armed forces, Deputy Prime Minister Jan Jankowski, Kazimierz Mocharski, head of the Home Army's radio telegraph service, and Władysław Bartoszewski, then an editor of the underground press. From Pruszków, Choróbski, using newly obtained forged documents, traveled deep into occupied Poland. In mid-October, he arrived in Krakow, and in mid-November, he received a new official identity card. In Krakow, Choróbski had family with whom he could stay, although the Struszkiewicz family boarding house was overcrowded. Therefore, he lived on 1 Pirackiego Street, and for several months at the turn of 1944 and 1945, performed surgical procedures at the Brothers Hospitallers Hospital. A few months later, Adam Kunicki, who had moved to Krakow after the Warsaw Uprising, took over his neurosurgical duties. Choróbski returned to the capital in February 1945. The liberation of Warsaw on January 17, 1945, revealed a devastated city, including hospitals in ruins. The war resulted in the devastation of approximately 84% of Warsaw's left bank buildings. Historic buildings, churches, and industrial buildings suffered nearly 90% damage. Among the undamaged apartment buildings in the capital was Choróbski's residential property on Czerwonego Krzyża Street, which was adjacent to the Nazi Air Force Hospital. Thanks to the location, his living quarters likely survived, and Choróbski's luxurious apartment remained undamaged. He was able to move in again and have a roof over his head in the city of ruins. Unfortunately, the situation was different at the Infant Jesus Hospital, where many buildings were severely damaged and required extensive renovation. The damaged roof, broken windows, and interior devastation consumed countless hours of ward staff work. On February 7, 1947, Associate Professor Jerzy Choróbski became the formal head of the neurosurgery clinic, which was transferred to the Praski Hospital. Thus, the first post-war neurosurgical center in Warsaw was established. The clinic had more than 3 times as many beds as its previous location. Thanks to Choróbski's inspiring lectures, medical courses, and the clinic's working atmosphere, interest in neurosurgery drew a new group of young neurosurgical trainees. New assistants included Shapiro, Sierpinski, Kozniewska, and Vepkovsky, and in 1949, Rudnitsky, Kempski, and Wisławski. Geldner and Wojcian joined the team in 1950. Because of the isolation of Polish neurosurgery during the war, foreign neurosurgeons, former acquaintances, and friends of Choróbski eagerly visited to showcase the achievements of modern neurosurgery, surgical techniques, and anesthesia. They did not hide their satisfaction at having found their student and friend amid the post-war devastation. As a result, the neurosurgery clinic was visited by several world-class neurosurgeons who brought journals and books that were unavailable in Poland. Howard Nafziger traveled from the University of California, San Francisco, along with Choróbski's friend, Loyal Davis, with whom Choróbski had spent the last year of his residency at Northwestern University in Chicago. The post-war years of 1945 to 1956 are considered the period of Stalinization of the Polish nation, when mass terror affected almost every citizen. Opponents, members of the independence underground, and those who disagreed with the established communist ideology were eliminated. The period of Professor Choróbski's surveillance coincided with a widespread terror of Polish society, which is also one of the darkest pages in Polish history. Citizens who were unjustly suspected of or who resisted communist rule, whether actively or passively, were assigned so-called dossier files in which information about them was collected in a top-secret manner so that they could serve as evidence during court proceedings, which often bore the hallmarks of trumped-up or even fabricated accusations. Professor Choróbski was assigned a CH file, and secret surveillance, including systematic observation, was conducted by 5 intelligence units. Due to his extensive foreign contacts, including with citizens of American and British descent, Choróbski was inherently considered an enemy suspected of espionage, and the CH file served to substantiate these allegations, however false. During the war, Choróbski maintained contact with Stefan Korbonski and his wife Zofia, who headed the cipher office and the Civilian Warfare Command radio station, and relayed information from Poland to the government in exile. This likely explains why they knew each other and were friends with Choróbski. After the war, both Stefan and Zofia immigrated to the United States to avoid political persecution. During the Stalinist terror, Penfield was informed that Choróbski was dissatisfied with the situation in Poland and had hinted to the British neurologist Carmichael that he wanted to escape the Iron Curtain. Meanwhile, Choróbski had invited Penfield to a congress of the Polish Neurological Society, to which Penfield initially confirmed his attendance, but soon after canceled his trip without giving a specific reason. It turned out that Penfield had received a letter from Canada's Undersecretary of State and Deputy Foreign Minister, in which the Canadian Chargé d'Affaires in Warsaw reported that he had learned from the British Embassy that the Polish authorities suspected Choróbski of attempting to defend Western theories in an area under Soviet rule. Therefore, he asked Penfield to withdraw from the conference. It's possible that Choróbski wanted to discuss in person his plans for escape to the West with Penfield. Unfortunately, and to make matters worse, just before the conference, Choróbski's wife, Victoria, died from injuries sustained in a fall from a balcony, so his escape plans to the West failed. In May 1951, Professor Choróbski began to achieve his most significant clinical and scientific breakthroughs. Thanks to the initiative of his student and hospital director, Stanislaw Sierpiński, the neurosurgery clinic acquired its own building on the grounds of the Infant Jesus University Hospital. The clinic had full diagnostic and surgical capabilities, comparable to those of most neurosurgical centers worldwide, and Professor Choróbski developed his skills, gaining recognition both domestically and internationally. Under one roof, without leaving the building, laboratory tests, diagnostic procedures, surgeries, and even early rehabilitation could be performed. In addition to teaching and providing services, the clinic also conducted scientific research. Before the grand opening of the neurosurgery clinic, a misunderstanding arose between the hospital's director, Sierpiński, who represented the Communist Party, and Professor Choróbski. Choróbski did not consent to the clinic's opening on May 1st, believing it would carry political overtones and that science should be apolitical. In his memo, secret agent Olek cites the following exchange between Sierpiński and Choróbski. "I authorize the invitation of representatives of the Central Committee of the Polish United Workers' Party, but only as your private guests," Choróbski said. Sierpiński replied, "I disagree and demand an official invitation for party comrades. For one thing, it may be your authority, but not mine, so I don't agree to it," Choróbski replied. To this, Sierpiński replied, "It's your authority too." "Not true," replied Choróbski. "Then you don't know what the dictatorship of the working-class proletariat is," said Sierpiński. After this exchange, Choróbski relented, and the grand opening took place on April 30th, the day before the Communist Labor Day holiday. At the Infant Jesus University Clinical Hospital, Professor Choróbski's clinic was equipped for diagnostic and surgical procedures, with 24-hour on-call staff. Among the assistants were Wacien, Bydzinski, Mazurowski, Vronsky, Hoftek, and Rudnicki, who later became professors and heads of the first neurosurgery clinics in Poland. A film entitled Operation, produced by the Polish Film Chronicle in 1957, dates back to the clinic's heyday. The film features Professor Choróbski's assistants, Rudnicki, an assistant professor and his right-hand man, assists during the operation, while 31-year-old Professor Mazurowski watches from the back. In addition to him, the later Professors Sierpiński and Wisławski are standing behind, and the future Professor Wacien, the founder of Polish pediatric neurosurgery, administers general anesthesia. Józef Swiniarski, a key figure on Professor Choróbski's team, puts on a surgical mask, and Barbara Lodinska plays the role of the surgical scrub nurse. We're about to witness an unusual operation. Professor Choróbski, founder and head of the neurosurgical clinic in Warsaw, is particularly interested in brain surgeries. The results are comparable to those observed abroad. The patient was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Not long ago, he would have been doomed to imminent death. The surgery takes about an hour. The patient will be healthy, able to live and work. Currently, there are 6 neurosurgery centers in Poland. They are led by the professor's students. Undoubtedly, one of the most significant events not only for Choróbski, but also for neurosurgery and Polish medicine as a whole, was the awarding of an honorary doctorate by McGill University in Montreal. This extraordinary distinction was presented in October 1959 during a solemn gala, with the ceremonies and accompanying events lasting almost a week. Choróbski's honorary doctorate ceremony coincided with the 25th anniversary of the Montreal Neurological Institute and the end of Wilder Penfield's career, who founded it. Before retiring, Penfield wished to recognize his devoted students who had played an exceptional role in his professional endeavors. Choróbski received his degree from the University of Montreal at the height of his career, while government officials secretly plotted his dismissal. On the second day of the ceremony, Penfield introduced Choróbski. He came to Montreal in 1930, already well-trained in neurology and psychiatry. He turned his eager mind to neurosurgery and to research in the physiology of the brain and its circulation. 3 years we worked together, and I can say that few men in any university have a broader knowledge, and none a more unquenchable enthusiasm than Jerzy Choróbski. Returning in 1934 from his wander years of graduate study in Montreal, Chicago, London, and Paris, he introduced the specialty of neurosurgery in Poland in the face of many obstacles and trained a school of loyal neurosurgeons. Through the years that followed after 1939, the years of Poland's agony, he stood steadfast with that heroic race, his countrymen. In the history of that nation, Choróbski's contributions will rank high indeed. I am proud and happy to present this friend, distinguished scientist, outstanding surgeon, this stalwart son of Poland. A year later, Choróbski made amends with his mentor and friend by awarding Wilder Penfield the first honorary degree in the history of the Medical Academy of Warsaw in 1960, after a 13-year hiatus from the title awarded by the University of Warsaw in 1947. Penfield played a decisive role in shaping this specialty in Poland. As a consequence of Choróbski's aversion to the communist regime, the state authorities, in collaboration with the Secret Service, decided to bring his student, the newly appointed Professor Stemping, from Lodz to Warsaw as Choróbski's deputy, forcing Choróbski to resign. From 1948, the secret police blackmailed Stemping, promising to release his brother, priest Jan Stemping, from prison in exchange for his transfer from Lodz to Warsaw. Choróbski's forced resignation occurred on March 7, 1962, and from that moment on, he never returned to the clinic or operated again. No one was aware of the complexity of the covert interference. A schism ensued within the clinic, and 3 of Choróbski's most experienced, talented, and loyal students, Haftek, Rudnicki, and Kempski, resigned in protest. For the next 24 years, Choróbski and Stemping ignored and avoided each other. Their conflict was skillfully erased from conversations and publications for years as undesirable. In September 1962, a long-planned Congress of British and Polish neurosurgeons took place at the Stasiec Palace in Warsaw and the Pilz Villa in Krakow. The Congress coincided with the culmination of Professor Choróbski's achievements and his retirement from the operating table. Choróbski enthusiastically organized this symposium. He sought to present Polish neurosurgery in the best possible light and to take pride in his students. The Congress was, in a sense, intended to be a culmination of his life's work in the specialty, which had blossomed in his students. After the Congress, Joe Pennebaker, a British neurosurgeon, wrote a letter to Penfield expressing exceptional appreciation for the founder of Polish neurosurgery, Choróbski, and for the relationship between Penfield and Choróbski. I thought you would like to know that the Society of British Neurosurgeons had a meeting in Poland with Jerzy Choróbski at the end of last month, and it was a considerable success. I think the meeting gave George great pleasure, however, and certainly he deserves what little honor we could do him, because he is indeed the father of Polish neurosurgery. He has the greatest admiration for you, and as you imparted his best neurosurgical ideals to him, you can take some credit yourself for neurosurgery being as thriving as it is in Poland today. In response, Penfield embraced Choróbski's legacy. I was delighted to know that the meeting in Poland was a success. Yes, you are quite right. I have been very close to Jerzy Choróbski, and I am very fond of him. I agree with you that he has built up a magnificent school of neurosurgery in Poland, and it seems to me that it compares favorably with what has been done in other centers in Europe. Halina Koznewska, a student of Choróbski, took the initiative to establish the Polish Society of Neurosurgeons, which would be independent of the Neurological Society. In 1962, the doyen of Polish neurosurgery, Professor Choróbski, arrived in Lublin, along with leading neurosurgeons from Poland's leading neurosurgical centers. This 1962 meeting in Lublin was called the Lublin Regional Assembly. Choróbski provided spiritual support and leadership for the new society. Professor Kunicki, Choróbski's first student, continued to educate young neurosurgeons. Kunicki became the first president of the Polish Society of Neurosurgeons, thereby assuming the leadership of Polish neurosurgery following Professor Choróbski's departure. The first Congress of the Polish Society of Neurosurgeons was held in Gdansk in December 1964, and Professor Choróbski strongly supported the creation of a separate, independent society. In retirement, Choróbski continued to monitor the progress of his beloved specialty and reviewed scientific, doctoral, and habilitation theses. He served as a consultant and reviewer for numerous doctoral theses, particularly at the two military neurosurgery clinics in Warsaw, headed by his students Rudnicki, Kempski, and Haftek, who remained close to him throughout. Choróbski read extensively in the field, attended national and international scientific conferences, and privately entertained neurosurgeons from around the world. Choróbski maintained close contact with his loyal students and observed their scientific development. Haftek, a pupil of Choróbski, recalls, "Faithful assistants and many bright minds visited Choróbski in his Warsaw apartment. These visits were remembered as spiritual celebrations. Both academic circles and the post-war underground democratic opposition gathered at Choróbski's apartment on Czerwonego Krzyża Street. Various illegal leaflets from the anti-communist underground passed through the Choróbski's living quarters. His apartment is a piece of Polish history. After 1962, Choróbski was recognized and awarded numerous significant national honors. In 1977, on the 75th anniversary of his birth, he was awarded the Gold Medal for Merit to National Defense and the Military Medical Academy Medal for establishing the first neurosurgery department in Poland at the Garrison Hospital in 1934, for his heroic participation in the defense of Warsaw during the September German invasion in 1939, and for his contribution to educating an entire generation of Polish neurosurgeons, both military and civilian. On the occasion of Choróbski's 75th birthday, a ceremonial meeting was held, at which Choróbski, in his speech, expressed a fervent wish in Latin for the development of Polish neurosurgery. Crescite et multiplicamini, meaning grow and multiply. Indeed, the neurosurgical pedigree in Poland is associated with Choróbski, whose students expanded his ambitions and over the next 40 years fulfilled his wish. Choróbski's School of Neurosurgery educated many outstanding specialists in the field, who subsequently advanced neurosurgery in Poland and worldwide. Thanks to his first 20 students, the field spread to Poland, the United States, and Israel after 1946. A year before his death, information about Choróbski's achievements was published in the biographical guide Who's Who in Polish Medicine by Interpress. Under the banner of achievement, we find the answer: the establishment of neurosurgery as an independent medical specialty in Poland. Professor Glowacki confirms that this fact guarantees Choróbski a permanent place in the history of Polish neurosurgery. Choróbski gave his life for the good of the nation and neurosurgery, demonstrating a strong character not only professionally, but also as a heroic member of the resistance movement in the fight for a free Poland throughout the 20th century. He witnessed the Polish-Ukrainian War of 1918, actively participated in the Battle of Warsaw against the Bolsheviks in 1920, the Silesian Uprising of 1921, the September German invasion of 1939, for which he received the Virtuti Militari Cross, the resistance movement of 1939 to 1944, and the Warsaw Uprising of 1944. During the Stalinist period and the early post-war years, he was persecuted, surveilled, and harassed by the communist authorities and the Secret Service. Despite adversity, he remained true to himself and his ideals of a free and independent Poland, serving as an anti-regime activist, intellectual, outstanding scientist, and national hero. Thanks to his keen observation, excellent memory, tenacity, inner motivation, self-esteem, ambition, and the influence of his neurology and neurosurgery teachers, Choróbski achieved success in the specialty he helped create in Poland from its earliest days. The range of procedures performed in Poland during Choróbski's career was immense, and most were introduced there for the first time, in accordance with contemporary neurosurgical knowledge. This was possible thanks to Choróbski's extensive experience and training under the guidance of many of the founders of world neurosurgery. From Penfield, co-founder of brain neurophysiology and an epilepsy surgeon, Choróbski gained experience in a field that Cushing had largely left untouched. This allowed Choróbski's neurosurgical skills to extend beyond those of those who had studied exclusively with Cushing. Choróbski not only cultivated a circle of his students, but also gave his successors the opportunity, confidence, and enthusiasm to continue his clinical and scientific work. His students spread neurosurgery throughout Poland and the world. Choróbski was the first fully trained Polish neurosurgeon, combining elements of neuropathology, neurology, and neurophysiology, both experimental and clinical. It should come as no surprise that he is the founder of modern Polish neurosurgery.